So whether you're looking to preserve some aquarium plants from a recent aquascape, or you're looking to grow some plants a little bit faster so that you could sell them and make a little bit of profit off of the aquarium hobby, growing these plants immersed or out of water is such a great way for you to achieve those goals. So as you can see, I have a ton of anubias here left over from a recent experiment, and I don't have any more space in my main immersed setup behind me here. So I'm going to set up the simplest of immersed tubs, and I'm going to show you exactly how to set it up step by step. And odds are you probably already have most of the things needed to do this project, so after this video you'll be well on your way to growing some immersed aquarium plants. Alright, so for starters we need a bin to grow our immersed plants. Now I have a plastic storage bin here that I'm going to use for this project, but really any size that is available for you should work for this. There are two main things to look out for when choosing a bin. The first one is having a lid that is clear, because obviously we are going to have some sort of lighting, whether that is sunlight or an artificial light, and we need light to get down into our plants to grow. And the second most important thing is having a lid that fits pretty tight on the bin. This one here just kind of snaps down and it works pretty good. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but after all, we are trying to grow aquarium plants in this environment, so they are going to require a lot of humidity. So the tighter the lid, the better it's going to retain that humidity for our plants. Now I've grown aquarium plants in all kinds of sizes of bins, from tiny little deli containers to large setups just like the one behind me. So it really doesn't matter what size you have. However, you should be considering what kind of plants you want to grow in your immersed tub. So if you have tall plants in mind, you might want to get a bin that is a little bit taller just so that you have room for the plants to grow, or else they'll start hitting the lid and flopping over and it'll be a little bit of a mess. Alright, so now that we have our immersed bin selected, let's set that aside and talk a little bit about substrate. So the reality is, for growing immersed plants, you can pretty much use any substrate that you have available. However, if we're doing this as simple as possible, then soil is definitely the way to go. So as you can see here, I have two different types of soils in front of me. So for my situation, I probably have a few hundred anubias plants that I need to start getting into some sort of immersed bin, or else they're going to start dying off on me. So I figured I'm probably going to set up a number of bins today. So let's do a little mini experiment and test out two different types of soils and see if one of them grows these plants better than the other. But the two soils that we're going to use for this experiment is a black earth, which is pretty much the cheapest soil that I could find at Home Depot. And this soil really doesn't have any additives, and actually it has quite a bit of organic material. I can see some sticks and bark mixed in with the soil. But I have used this in the past, and I know that it does grow plants pretty well. And if we're talking about trying to do this as cheap as possible, this is definitely an option. So the second soil here is from a brand called ProMix, and it is an all-purpose potting soil. Now the packaging for this mentions how it has some sort of mycelium mixed in with the soil, which I understand is a symbiotic fungus that is going to help the roots of our plants. So I'll be very interested to see if that has any noticeable difference compared to the black earth. And it also has a little bit of nutrients mixed in as well. So theoretically, if this soil has more nutrients, it should be growing our plants better. But of course, this does come at a little bit extra cost because it wasn't as cheap as the black earth. So my recommendation until we have the results from this experiment would be to use whatever soil is available for you. I have used such a wide variety of soils in the past, and they have all worked wonders. And at the end of the day, if we do find that some of our plants are lacking in growth, we can always supplement the soil with a little bit of fertilizer, whether that's mixed through a foliar spray, or we can just mix some fertilizers with water and add it to the tub so that it can supplement the soil. So our next step here is to simply add the soil to the bin. Now, unlike setting up a dirted aquarium where you need to be a little bit cautious as to how much soil you're including, in these immersed setups, it doesn't really matter. And in fact, the more soil that you add, theoretically, the more nutrients that you are including for your plants to use up. So it isn't a bad idea to go a little bit heavy with the soil. Now for me, I think the sweet spot is around 1 inch to 1.5 inches. And that's what I'm going to be doing for these immersed bins here. So we'll start with this bin here, and we'll start with the all-purpose potting soil. Alright, so I may have gone a little bit deeper than I was anticipating, but I think this is still looking pretty good, so we'll just go with it. Next up, the black earth is going in. Alright, so these tubs are looking great now. Our next step is to moisten the soil, which is going to do two things for us. The first thing is it's going to make it a lot easier to plant into the soil when it's a little bit moist. And the second thing is it's going to help keep the humidity up in these bins, which is required for these aquarium plants to thrive. And the rule of thumb for moistening the soil is to get it as wet as possible without having any standing water on the soil. And this is going to ensure that we have as much water to keep that humidity high in these bins. And to moisten the soil, I am just using a spray bottle here, but if you're doing this outside, I'd recommend using a garden hose because that'll probably go a little bit faster for you. Alright, so now that everything has been sprayed down, we're ready to start adding our aquarium plants into the Emersed bin. Now, as you can see here, I have quite a few anubias plants, and they actually just came out of an experiment that I was doing. So they're going to be the plants that I'm going to be using for my new Emersed bin here. However, you probably have a few different species of aquarium plants that you're looking to plant. It's important to note that not all aquarium plants will actually transition and grow in an immersed environment. However, most aquarium plants in our hobby should be good to transition to an immersed environment. And the reason for this is because in nature, a lot of the aquarium plants that we have actually come from the edges of creeks and river systems. And this area is called the riparian zone. And the riparian zone, especially in the regions where these plants are from, undergoes a lot of seasonal flooding. And this means that the plants that grow there have adapted to be able to grow in both flooded conditions, which would be most similar to our aquariums, but also when the floods go down, they need to be able to grow outside of the water. So our Emersed bin here basically is trying to simulate that riverbank setting where the flood has gone down. There's still a lot of water because it's adjacent to the river, but the plants are ultimately growing outside of the water. Now, there are a few plants in the aquarium hobby that are truly aquatic, and these plants wouldn't be suitable for an immersed tub simply because in nature they only grow underwater. So for example, this would include plants like Vallisneria, dwarf sage, and any kind of bulb plant like tiger lotus or Aponogetons. Those wouldn't be suitable for an immersed setup. So to actually plant these plants, it's really easy in an immersed setup because you don't have to worry about anchoring the plants and having them float up like you would in an aquarium. So for example, with anubias here, all you really have to do is rest the rhizome down on the soil. You can press down a little bit so that it has good contact with the soil, but you really don't want to cover the rhizome with the soil. And over the next few days, the anubias plant will send down new roots down into the soil. And as the plant grows, the rhizome will continue to grow along the top of the soil layer. For plants like crypts, all you really have to do is anchor the roots down into the soil, very similarly to how you would do it normally for an aquarium. And you might have a little bit of dieback or melt depending on what conditions that crypt plant was grown in before. But with enough time, the plant will start to send out new leaves that are properly acclimated for the environment that you're now growing that plant in, and it'll start to thrive. The only main difference and tip that I have with planting stem plants is that if you actually lay the stem down on its side and make sure it has good contact with the soil, you will actually get two things out of that stem plant. First, it'll promote a lot more roots to grow down into the soil, which will help the plant grow faster. But also along the stem plant, you'll have a bunch more individual stems that start to sprout out of the original stem. And over time, you'll actually end up with more stems than you started off with. So that is a really great way to propagate stem plants. So now that the bin is fully planted, all we need to do is add the lid. All right, so I mentioned earlier that using soil has a number of benefits for our immersed tubs, and this is where one of those benefits comes into play. So as we attach our lid and close it nice and tight, what we're doing is we're creating a nice little environment here for our plants. And what's actually going to happen is over time, all of that organic material in the soil is going to start to slowly decompose. And that decomposition is actually really beneficial for our plants because it not only unlocks new nutrients that the plants can use to grow, but the decomposition itself is going to produce a lot of carbon dioxide. Now, all the microbial activity in the soil is what's going to be producing that CO2, and our plants are going to be able to directly use that to fuel their growth. Now, with that said, it's definitely okay to open up, and probably also beneficial to open up your lids and get some fresh air into the plants, especially if you're going in with a spray bottle to spray the plants. I do recommend, at least when you first start out, just to make sure that the soil is sufficiently wet, to go in every couple days with a spray bottle and spray the plants. And down the road, if you feel like your plants are starting to struggle with not enough nutrients in the environment, you can actually come in with a foliar spray, which is basically a diluted nutrient solution in a spray bottle that you spray on top of the plants, and the leaves will be able to uptake all of those nutrients. Now, the only other aspect to consider for your immersed tub is how you're going to light it. So I have definitely grown immersed tubs in a nice bright windowsill. And the only downside to that is, for me, I live in Ontario, Canada, so in the wintertime, I don't get a lot of daylight, and so it definitely slows down the growth of the plants. I've also grown immersed plants in a variety of different types of artificial lights, such as fluorescent bulbs, LED shop lights, and LED grow lights, and all methods have worked really well for me. So with all that said, if you're going for the simplest Emersed tub, a nice bright windowsill will do well for you, but if you have some artificial light that you can spare for these plants, they definitely would not hurt with some extra light. In fact, I actually ran an experiment in the setup behind me using LED grow lights versus LED shop lights, and we did find, at least with the anubias plants, that the LED grow lights had significantly better growth compared to the shop lights. So check out that video if you're curious about those results. But for these plants, I do have a shelf set up that has some of those LED grow lights, so I know that's going to do a really great job to grow these anubias plants. So we'll get these plants tucked away on their shelf, and we'll check back in with them in a few months to see if there was any major differences between the all-purpose potting soil versus the black earth. Now this is a very simple design for an Emersed tub, but as you can see behind me, I have an ebb and flow Emersed setup which has a capacity of almost 500 plants, and I'm able to grow plants in this incredibly easy. So if you're curious to learn more about another kind of Emersed setup, click through to this video here and I'll walk through exactly how I'm able to maintain this system. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, take care.